Hi guys, as we're learning to interpret primary and secondary resources, I'm going to be watching with you the news report about the article that you read this week. So let's get right into it. I'm going to share my screen with you guys. And here we go.
The worst locust crisis in decades is ravaging East Africa, threatening the food supply for millions of people. Kenya, Somalia, and Ethiopia are at the center of this latest outbreak. You can see in this video just how massive the locust swarms have been across the region.
These bugs have infested farmland and destroyed crops. Farmers are calling on the international community to help prevent a food crisis.
So guys, did you notice what the swarm actually looked like? It almost looked like it was covering the sky almost. It's a lot of them. And just like from what the article that you read, they are eating the food.
Kuna misimu miwili, lakini ule msimu mwingine wa mwezi wa 4 unakuwa mfupi na saa nyingine hatupati chakula. Huo ndio ule msimu tunategemea na ni kama sitatuharibia kabisa. Tutakaa njaa tu throughout the year mpaka next year mwezi wa 10 ndio tutapanda. This year mwezi wa 10.
The United Nations says the region needs around $76 million to combat the crisis. Officials warn the locust outbreak will spread across the entire continent of Africa and into other parts of the world if action isn't taken.
This is a very rare phenomena, but once it does occur, it becomes extremely threatening to food securities, livelihoods, pastures, and of course, with pastures, if herders have to move animals into new areas, that this can be sources of conflict.
CBS News foreign correspondent Deborah Patta is following the latest in Johannesburg. So Deborah, even before this crisis, millions of people in the region faced high levels of food insecurity. And we know this area has typically faced harsh climate conditions like drought and flooding. So what's the latest on this crisis and how bad is it?
Well, as you just mentioned, $76 million bad. That's how much the United Nations says it needs to combat this outbreak. And they're making no bones about it. They need that money now. It's the worst in 70 years for Kenya and in quarter of a century for Somalia and Ethiopia. And just to give you a sense of how big these swarms are, one was spotted in a part of Kenya that contained about 200 billion of these creatures. And in the sky, it occupied a space 3 times the size of New York City. And as the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN has warned, they could increase 500-fold by June if not contained and checked immediately and spread elsewhere. Now, part of the problem is that these locusts are very difficult to track. They move very quickly, but they're not just a scary invasion. They also eat food. Even a small swarm of locusts can consume enough food for 35,000 people, and farmers are complaining that about 90% of their crops have already been destroyed. The locusts are now moving towards Uganda and towards South Sudan. South Sudan already under terrible, terrible strain from food insecurity. And if you consider that over 20 million people in East Africa are already facing food shortages due to periodic drought and flooding, you have a very serious problem when locusts start eating their only source of food. Vlad?
Deborah, we're watching like this video where people are trying to swat at this swarm with their jackets, and so it looks absolutely futile. What exactly is causing the outbreak to escalate the way it has?
Well, you know, as many people have mentioned, these swarms look almost biblical, and while it may be very tempting to blame some kind of higher power here, there are some very obvious suspects, and one of those is a changing climate. These locusts were actually spotted 18 months ago in the Arabian Peninsula. They then moved to Yemen by July last year, and already the FAO was warning that if left unchecked, if preventative measures were not put in place, they would then move to Kenya. Well, they weren't, and now they're in Kenya. And what contributed to this was unusually wet, rainy seasons, which created this exceptional breeding ground for locusts. They thrive after rainy weather because there's so much food to eat, and they grow very, very quickly. They only live 3 to 5 months, but in that time, a population can absolutely explode if left unchecked. And that is what actually happened in this particular instance.
So, Deborah, you mentioned that the UN is calling for $76 million to help combat the crisis. If money isn't helping, when will the season actually end? In other words, there's got to be an end to this. And so I'm wondering when that will happen and how quickly people can regroup.
Well, the season ends in about June when there are drier conditions, but by then it's almost too late. The $76 million needs to come in now. I think they've managed to get about $15 million so far. And if you consider that in November, Ethiopia was asking for only $6 million, that's an idea of how quickly this crisis has grown because these locust populations have been left unchecked. Part of the problem is also conflict in both Yemen and Somalia, which makes it very difficult to do any kind of aerial spraying. But if they get the money now, by April, it's too late because you've then already created this problem. If they get the money soon, then they can start the spraying because the idea is to get the locusts while they're still young and hopping and before that population booms. It's very difficult to track them, but if you can have some kind of surveillance, you can then follow them because these locusts can move about 90 miles in just one day. And climate experts are warning that there's going to be continuing unpredictable weather in the Horn of Africa. And so it's going to be very difficult to anticipate when these locusts may breed again and in such quantities. So if you can put those measures in place now and get that money, that really is the ideal solution. Otherwise, then you have a food crisis problem in an area that's already facing massive, massive food shortages.
All right, heartbreaking images there for the folks who will have to suffer and deal with this until June, which is
a
pretty
long time
away. Deborah Patta for us in Johannesburg. Deborah, thank you.
Okay, guys, so go ahead and do the fun activity that we have for this article and this video.